full-fledged Teams competitor. And we were able to kind of go from this funding decision to an actual public beta in less than 12 months. If you think about it, that's kind of crazy and insane, right? So we spent about 6 months before that, kind of like refining out the concepts and stuff like that. But being able to go from zero to a fully fledged public beta at the scale of Microsoft is something that was never really done before. And there were a couple of things that I think kind of led us to be able to kind of build this out, right? The first was, and these were like small things.
Once again, welcome to another episode by the product folks. This time we're digging deeper into the Microsoft Teams growth story. A little intro into our community. We are a volunteer-driven community of product managers, product enthusiasts, product marketers, product designers, everyone coming together to help the community grow together. We have a bunch of online initiatives. Learn PM with me, which is an early stage curated resources to help people upskill into product management. We have Insurger.club, which is an APM program, and a bunch of online initiatives. Jumping right in, introducing our speaker for today. Thank you so much once again, Rahul, for joining us. Rahul's worked with Microsoft for a bunch of years across the Microsoft Teams team, as well as Microsoft Azure. He recently switched to an early stage startup called Moveworks in the Bay Area. He's been active in the Indian ecosystem before moving there. He had his own early stage edtech startup as well. So that's about it, Rahul. Over to you, taking us through this journey of Microsoft Teams growth specifically, and then followed by Q&A, which I'll jump right back in. So hope you guys enjoy the session, and I'll see you guys around.
Awesome. Let me share my screen so you should be able to see it. Alrighty. Thanks, Suhas, for that intro, and thanks for having me this morning and this evening. And I really appreciate everybody being so curious and interested in this story. So as Suhas mentioned, my name is Rahul, and for about 3.5 years, I spent time as a product manager on Microsoft Teams, primarily on the messaging and the presence teams. So like pretty much. I've kind of seen that growth journey kind of go from zero to nearly about 40 odd million, and then the last 20 or so days they managed to kind of add 33 more million users. So like Teams is right now at about 75 million daily active users. So it's been a fascinating ride, and I'm very excited to kind of walk you through a couple of the levers that we saw worked very well for us. We'll talk about a couple of interesting case studies. And then towards the end, I'm happy to take any questions as they come about. So let me quickly give you a little bit of more context. Like Suhas did a great job introducing me. Right now, I work as a product manager at Moveworks. Moveworks is an AI automation platform that lets IT teams scale. And interestingly, the reason I'm at this job is because they build on top of Microsoft Teams. So they're one of the platform apps that builds on top of Teams as well as Slack and other APIs as well. And I saw them going off on a rocket ship growth, and I made the move as well. So I spent a good chunk of time on the Teams team when it was very, very early. Spent some time on Azure as well. So I've kind of seen the two big growth orgs within Microsoft. And before that, I was at Apple briefly and spent some time going to grad school at Georgia Tech, and then I graduated from RVC from Bangalore. All right, a quick thing that I'll call out is the fact that a lot of this is things that I'm trying to jog my memory about. So most of the things that you hear about in this session today are things that I tried to recollect to the best of my imagination, hit up my friends wherever they could supplement my knowledge and my gaps. But then remember this, most great history is always written in a revisionist style. So there's that. The other thing is a lot of this is biases towards my core focus and the blast radius of my impact, right? So, and if you were to kind of think about applying some of these lessons into your own products, like your mileage may vary. I'm happy to kind of talk talk to you more about it. All right. Today we'll talk about three broad buckets. I think first kind of talk about the team's story and the team's journey, and talk about like all of the different growth levers that we leverage, and then what does it look like kind of going forward? What are the challenges up ahead? Where does the upside what does the upside look like? All right. Most of you would have seen this infographic doing the rounds not too long ago, right? So you see this amazing, steep curve, a hockey stick curve up and to the right, comparing Teams daily active users to Slack's connected users. They're not necessarily apples, more like apples to oranges in terms of comparison, but I think the one thing that this kind of shows you is how quickly the Teams product was able to go from 0 to 75 in less than about 3 years of being publicly available for people to start using it. We were able to kind of quickly add so many users. And let's address the elephant in the room, right? So a lot of people talk about how this is a result of Microsoft's proprietary distribution. So with Office 365, we have over 250 million monthly active users. So it just makes sense that Teams was able to capitalize on that. The one thing that I learned the hard way is while distribution can be a huge advantage, right? It is only as much as an advantage is if you can build a product that can tap into it, right? A classic example of having distribution but not necessarily figuring out product is Google when it comes to messaging, or even Google when it comes to the cloud, right? So they had this amazing head start owning both Gmail with Hangouts kind of built in, as well as the Android operating system, and they weren't necessarily able to leverage that into dominating the messaging space. So distribution only matters as long as your product is structured in a way to take advantage of this. And I'll talk to you about how we kind of stumbled into what worked for us as well. This is not something that everybody knew how to do straight from the get-go, and it was a series of steps that we had to take to get there. Some of you might, whoever subscribes to Ben Thompson, some of you might actually remember this particular sheet where Ben is kind of comparing how Teams kind of fits into the existing Microsoft ecosystem. He compares it to Slack and Zoom, of course. And the way you read this 2 by 2 is you have existing use cases, and you have new use cases, and you have existing customers, and which is your proprietary distribution, and then you have new customers on the top, right? So Office is obviously an existing use case, right? So a lot of people use Word, Excel, PowerPoint. They also use a bunch of other services like email that comes along with Office, right? And over time, over the last 10 to 15 years, Office 365 has built up a significant set of users. Teams kind of comes in around 2016, and what we're really doing is capture the new use case of collaborating in groups and channels, like basically being able to seamlessly use chat to kind of communicate with your coworkers, build that use case, but tap into the existing relationships that we have. So almost kind of like a defensive play. Like Slack kind of came in a couple of years earlier, kind of really reinventing this category of IRC and making it more palatable, making it more useful to existing to people in the workplace. And then Zoom obviously came in much after Skype for Business, much after WebEx, Teams, and video conferencing. And they were kind of able to take market share in this whole new relationship and existing use case bucket. The reason I like this is because it really captures a whole bunch of different dimensions, right? This simple 2 by 2. Through this, we can kind of game out what value Teams kind of drives to the Office 365 bundle, the existing bundle, and how do you also think about go to market when you are trying to build a new customer relationship? Does it vary from if you had an existing use case, or does it vary when you have a new use case? Like how is Slack and Zoom's go to markets different, and how do they actually differ from Teams, and how are they poised for success? We'll talk a little bit about that towards the end. So I want to touch upon this topic a little bit, right? So a lot of people can talk about how Teams kind of plugs into the existing framework of growth for of Office 365, but really the thing that we started noticing very, very clearly as soon as we launched Teams was the fact that like companies or organizations that use Teams are significantly more likely to stick with the Office 365 than without Teams. Right? And this is something that we learned through a series of customer studies and kind of analyzing the data, right? And significantly, Teams is by bundling this new use case into the existing series of products, we were able to really drive more value back to the bundle itself. So we weren't just capturing proprietary distribution, we were actually making sure that the bundle becomes more valuable as a whole. So there are four dimensions through which we think through this, right? The first is these organizations are more current, right? So current is like a thing that Microsoft thinks about all the time, where if you think about it, a lot of people use Word 2010, 2013, right? And in fact, like if you ask me, I can't tell you what's the difference between Word 2020 and then Word 2013. Like you probably use the same set of features. You type a document, you format it, and then you're done, right? So for us, when we made the shift to the O365 bundle, which is a monthly subscription, it was very, very important for people to for us to communicate to customers that, hey, like you need to be on the most up-to-date version for us to deliver the most value for you, whether that's security, privacy updates, or even newer AI-related features that we were consistently building out, right? And a lot of our customers weren't able to like take advantage of some of these new features, which resulted in them leaving to competitors like G Suite or Quip. So like we started noticing that as a result of the inbuilt demand for a product like Teams, a lot more customers were made the hard decision to kind of upgrade from their older versions of Office down to the latest versions. Right? We also noticed that the way the Teams product is built, it's structured in such a way that it makes it very, very easy to create files, to store files, to edit them together. Right? So we were able to drive some of these core metrics across the entire suite, which are a leading indicator of how likely a customer is going to re-sign with us at the end of the subscription period. And third, most important thing is the fact that we were able to prove demonstrably that a customer using Teams is more likely to upgrade to higher versions of the SKU, primarily because they want to take advantage of more complex, more expensive meeting options, like things like being able to dial into meetings with a number and things like those. So this is something that is a narrative that does not get told very often, just in terms of like how much of a no-brainer it is to include Teams into the Office 365 bundle, not because of the distribution angle, but because of how much more valuable it makes the bundle and how much more sticky it makes the customer. Right. So who are we up against in this journey? There's the obvious, competitor in terms of Slack. There's also a whole bunch of other enterprises apps like Cisco WebEx Teams. You also have the likes of Hangouts and Discords that we were up against, and then you have Zoom. Right. There's one competitor that's not on this slide. Maybe if you can take, I'll take a little bit of a pause here. This is like a competitor that probably everyone on this call uses on a day-to-day basis, but you may not necessarily think about as a direct competitor for Teams. Let me see, does anybody have any guesses on how this would, on who this might be?
Rahul, bunch of options coming in the chat section. So you might just want to.
Let's see. All right. All right. I think a bunch of people kind of got it. WhatsApp. That's correct. So I think when I was telling Suhas this, he was kind of mind blown about the fact that we considered WhatsApp as a competitor as well. So here's why, right? So here's something that we noticed really, really early on was the fact that in most of our organizations outside of the United States, right? WhatsApp was an entrenched competitor. Like every single person kind of used WhatsApp for their communication needs. You have work groups that were kind of built on top of it. Like it was mind-boggling when we went and did a customer study with SBI that has like over 2 lakh employees, right? They use WhatsApp for everything from coordinating their branch tea breaks to actually doing KYC and sharing those documents between desks. So WhatsApp kind of really became the meta work operating system completely in a stealth kind of way with nobody really noticing it, and even the WhatsApp product team not really kind of building anything to take advantage of it. Like here's an example of a study that we did at like a really major retailer. And if you notice, like they mapped out their communication flow based on role and based on the app that they were using. So in their headquarters, they were using email for most of those things, but then as soon as it kind of came down to the shop floor, they would leverage WhatsApp. So we started noticing that this WhatsApp was like a significant competitor to Teams. And when we were rolling out Teams at State Bank of India, right now they use Teams, one of the big focuses for us was to ensure that the mobile apps in particular were performant and simple enough. Like so the thing that I learned by looking at this is never take anything for granted, right? So you should kind of always think about what your users are using all the time, and not just competitors, just in terms of like how your sales cycle works. So this is like a very, very interesting kind of lesson that we learned about maybe a year and a half in. So let me switch gears. Let's kind of take a step back and kind of talk about how the Teams product started, right? So the Teams product group started as an incubation group, which was primarily focused on building out the future of work, right? So we were kind of thinking about, we were called do more experiences kind of predictably. We wanted to enable professionals kind of do more. There were lots of incubation apps that were being tried out in this group. So there were things like a list-taking app, an app for, much like LinkedIn Pulse, for news for professionals, and so on and so forth. And this group was led by this OG person at Microsoft called Brian McDonald. So he's this dude who joined Microsoft back in the 80s, and he joined Microsoft by way of acquisition as well. So he sold what eventually became Excel for Mac into Microsoft. So he's kind of been this kind of a guy who's consistently built newer and newer products. He's also responsible for building Outlook over time. Outlook, and then he also built the first version of something that was internally called NetDocs or Office Online. So this was before Google Docs even came about. Like this was late 90s when he was kind of thinking about these types of concepts, right? So he's always kind of been like this. Let's kind of experiment with new ideas and new concepts and see where that goes. Kind of person, very, very scrappy and very entrepreneurial type of person throughout. So he started building this group together. And one of the incubation projects was something called a shared email inbox, where you might have multiple people kind of collaborating on email. Like you might have seen this with the likes of like Front, and I think even Fresh Service has like some of these capabilities kind of built in right now. But like we were trying to think about like what that means for like, engineering teams to collaborate on a shared email inbox, right? And around this time, like we started noticing that Slack was gaining more and more traction. So we pivoted from the email kind of lens to a more of a real-time kind of communication lens. So basically move off of the email as the core construct of the shared inbox to chat, and then slowly one thing led to another, and we realized that hey, we were competing in the same exact space as Slack, right? Which also eventually means that given that Slack was on a tear, right, since 2013, 2014, right, every other big company or every other startup down in the Bay Area was using Slack. It became like an existential threat for Microsoft. So much so there were like 4 or 5 groups within Microsoft that were trying to build a Slack competitor or a Slack clone, right? So they were, the Skype team was building something, the Office team was building something, and of course this Do More Experiences crew was kind of trying to build something. And what eventually happened was there was some large company Game of Thrones that kind of happened, and all of these products kind of brought together. They were evaluated on their merits, and then and the group that I belong to, the Do More Experiences group, basically was given full funding to go build out a full-fledged Teams competitor. And we were able to kind of go from this funding decision to an actual public beta in less than 12 months. If you think about it, that's kind of crazy and insane, right? So we spent about 6 months before that, kind of like refining out the concepts and stuff like that. But being able to go from zero to a fully fledged public beta at the scale of Microsoft is something that was never really done before. And there were a couple of things that I think kind of led us to be able to kind of build this out, right? The first was, and these were like all things that were very, very new to Microsoft and Microsoft's product building culture, right? So the first was the fact that we built completely on open web APIs, right? So like open web APIs, open source web technology. So we were an Angular app, now we're a React app, right? These were technologies that were not used at Microsoft, right? So if you were building a desktop, and Electron, for example, let us kind of build across web and desktops together. And these were things that were not new to Microsoft. This also meant that when we were hiring engineers for the team, we mostly had to hire new college hires or go outside because the skill set was kind of lacking within Microsoft, right? The second thing was whenever we tried to kind of integrate other Microsoft products, right? We had a very clear vision that Teams would be the center of collaboration, the hub of collaboration, and we could not leave Microsoft products out. But then every time we would talk to internal teams about potentially partnering, we'd always end up getting the same response saying, come back to us when you're bigger, come back to us when you have your customers, right? So one of the things that I think was very, very prescient that we ended up doing was building completely on top of public APIs, right? So most of the APIs that Teams uses to interface with the rest of Microsoft products are things that normal developers like you and I can now go use as well. So we built completely on the Microsoft Graph. And the third thing, which I think is very, very interesting, was the fact that we never fell for the not invented here trap. This is something that large companies in particular are very, very susceptible to, where they try to reinvent the wheel consistently, right? So one of the things that we were able to do very well was build on top of Skype's existing infrastructure, right? So we were able to kind of build this new collaboration paradigm on top of Skype's existing infrastructure, Skype's existing scale. So it allowed us to get a product out to market significantly sooner than if we were to have to reinvent the wheel. And this came with a significant bunch of trade-offs, right? Which meant that like all of Skype's APIs were built specifically for Skype, and we were trying to build a group collaboration concept that had threaded chat, that had reactions, that had open platforms and all those things, and which basically meant that there was no one-to-one compatibility between the APIs that we were using to the experience that we wanted to deliver. And we had to kind of build our own kind of microservices to kind of bridge the gap. But these were trade-offs that we made to specifically optimize for speed. And the fourth and most important thing was being able to navigate the large company tax, right? So for people who work at startups, this feels kind of nebulous, but then when you work at a large company, you realize that there's so many different systems and processes that are set in place for good reasons, right? Because at the end of the day, when a customer buys Office, they're buying Office as one entity. All of those things should work together, like all of the administration should work together, all of the security and privacy control should be there from day one, right? So we were able to kind of work our way and pay this large company tax selectively, right? So we were able to kind of opt out of things like, you can only ship once a month, and every time you ship, you have to let people know 6 weeks in advance that you're shipping. We were able to kind of opt out of those types of taxes and prioritize ruthlessly for speed. And this in fact is a lot of these things were first for Microsoft, right? So we were considered to be very brash and arrogant for doing a couple of these things instead of going down the traditional route for partnering with the right set of teams and then building this out over a 2 to 3 year kind of period. right? And why were we kind of able to do this, right? So if you think about it, there's this concept in my head that I've been talking about for a while, and I call it institutional intuition. Some other people call it Conway's law. Basically, the way you set up an org is how you ship, right? The thing that I think about a lot is, like, especially now that I'm at a smaller company, is how easy it is to drive alignment, right? And a lot of that alignment basically comes from the fact that there's a founder in the team, and the founder has a lot of moral authority to align teams together, right? And out of alignment comes execution, and out of execution comes outcomes and profit, right? Typically in companies which are no longer founder led and which typically tend to get much larger, founders' moral authority typically tends to be, replaced by past successes, right? So you as a set of people know that this thing works, so you do more and more of it, right? Which is why, like, every single thing at Microsoft up until Satya took over was something Windows, right? Like, Microsoft Azure was actually initially called Windows Azure. It's kind of crazy. And some of the URLs even to this day have that artifact, windows.azure.com kind of stuck there, right? It kind of goes to show to you that it's so hard to get a really large ship like Microsoft realigned around things. And the only way we were able to kind of go do this was because we started off as a much smaller org, rallied around this person called Brian, who became like who took on the de facto role of founder and tiebreaker in the org, right? So the thing that I think about, or rather how I think about this now that I'm a different company now, or in the future when I go join some other place or start something on my own, is the way you drive alignment is to articulate your tenets and to communicate like all the time and overly, right? The only company at scale that I've seen do this very well is Amazon, with their leadership principles and the fact that they have a very structured way of thinking about teams. I haven't necessarily seen anybody else do this. And this is like definitely one of those things where I attribute this to a significant part of teams being able to move and ship so quickly. And this is by far my favorite slide. We launched in November of 2016 to the public, and then we woke up to this amazing ad in the New York Times where Slack had taken out this full page ad welcoming us to the market, and they ended up giving us a couple of tips. One of the things that I really like about this ad, even though a lot of people were a little flabbergasted, was the fact that a lot of things that they articulated here, right? So thoughtfulness over features, being, biasing towards an open platform versus a closed platform, like being obsessed about your users and your customers and having that love show through in your design of the product, right? Were all things that we were able to kind of pull off. So when we were reading this, right, so it kind of really hit home that they underestimated what the product that we kind of put out there. And it was almost like it was kind of like a shot in the arm for the entire team. So I always like looking back at this every time I'm stuck in somewhat of a weird challenge to just look at this and be like, yes, this we were able to kind of pull through. All right, so that was kind of how Team started. We were able to kind of go from zero to something out there in the market that people could use in about a year and a half, which is insane if you think about it. So let's switch gears a little bit and talk about the different growth levers, right? So obviously there was organic adoption, right? So these were like on the day that we launched, it became part of the Office 365, distribution bundle, which means that if your organization used Office 365, you could go, automatically go use it, right? So this is what we really meant by organic adoption, right? And so we saw a lot of different, people kind of come into the product, especially over the first couple of months, right? Play around with the product a little bit, click around different areas of the product, and then churn and never come back, right? So we had significantly, tremendous churn over the first couple of months. So we put together like a crack team to look at the onboarding flow, to look at all of those different things, to try out a whole bunch of various techniques, so we can teach people the right way of using Teams. Like our core hypothesis kind of going into it the first couple of months was people didn't necessarily know what use case Teams fit into, right? So we kind of over-indexed on, onboarding experiences, tours, coach marks, all of the typical kind of SaaS onboarding techniques that you see out there to see if things work. But unfortunately, this is like one of those things that really didn't pay off significantly for us, right? So we and a lot of it is because the product team was often confusing correlation for causation, right? So I'll give you an example. So one of the hypotheses or one of the things that we saw in data was the fact that if you add a reaction to a message, you are likely to be much more engaged, right? And there was like a whole campaign that the entire product team kind of built around, adding a coach mark around reactions and encouraging people to kind of go add reactions to messages and stuff like that. But then it was clearly correlation where if you're using the product, then obviously you'll discover more and more of these fun little features versus that being the driver of growth. So over time, we kind of moved away from relying on these types of onboarding and tutorial type experiences to product-led growth, right? So now this is not really a new concept. It's something that's been out there for a while now, where product-led growth basically means that you are optimizing the product and you are building a product in such a way that it increases network effects or virality naturally, right? So, but where it really comes from the fact that you understand what your users, why your users are using the product for, and what they're using, what they're trying to achieve by using it, right? And the second thing that we always thought about when we were kind of thinking through this kind of mindset of product-led growth was like, hey, like if I were to build this, why would I care about it as a user, right? So we kind of moved away from like, oh, like this is a phenomenal product, let's just put it out there. Obviously, everybody knows how to use it. And if they don't, we'll just teach them how to use it and it should just work, to kind of moving away from that kind of mindset to saying, hey, let's really understand what are the customers' jobs to be done and make those kind of scenarios easy, right? And there were a couple of things that came out of this, right? The first was something we call role-specific onboarding experiences, right? We noticed that the first 5 to 10 users that joined any particular org were typically, or who started using Teams, were typically the people who were extremely excited about using a group collaboration product. Right? These are people that I think in the enterprise SaaS world you call champions, right? So we kind of rejiggered our onboarding experience to make it easy for champions to invite other people into their team, to structure their teams and channels the right way, to integrate with the right set of apps that their teams were already using, right? So empowering these champions to then go bring in the rest of their teams to start collaborating with each other on the Teams platform. And one of our secret weapons here was the fact that we could analyze O365 data to look at who was emailing who is creating the Word document that 5 other people come and make edits on. Right? We were able to identify through somewhat of a network analysis these types of influencers and champions within the org, and target our onboarding experiences specifically to them. Right? That was something that paid off enormously, just in terms of creating that successful adoption. We had a couple of internal metrics around like what makes a team healthy, typically correlated around the number of people, number of messages in the last couple of days, right? And we started seeing a significant lift in those metrics when we started focusing on empowering champions to go do the heavy lifting versus this whole versus a peanut butter approach of like onboarding. The second thing that that came out of this product-led growth mindset was something we called org-wide teams, right? So we started noticing that like in the onboarding flow, as a champion kind of came through, right, they were kind of struggling with, building out the right set of team structure, right? So like who should they invite on the team, right? How many people should there be? So one of the things that we ended up doing was to create a team by default for the entire organization, right? So if you think about it, this is not very different from Slack, where you create one Slack instance for your entire company. Teams is slightly different in the sense that Teams by default, you can direct message any single person within your company, and you can create small focused project, workspaces, right? So we kind of bootstrapped the team creation process by creating one project workspace for your entire company. And as people started, jumping into the Teams product to try it out, they already had one place where they could collaborate with the rest of their company, and they didn't have to go create a specific new project workspace. So we reduced kind of the friction of joining a team as a result of that, right? The third thing that kind of came out of this product-led growth kind of mindset was launching a new SKU for education, right? So we ended up building a whole new product for this space, and what we started noticing was teachers and students loved collaborating transparently in channels, right? And by integrating with the rest of the Microsoft education ecosystem, we were able to build a product that really competed with the likes of Google Classroom and Moodle and all of those kind of products without even investing in it much, right? The other big thing that I really like talking about was how, despite the initial experiences that we had about churn and people kind of coming in and leaving the product because they didn't understand it, we stuck with our strong opinions that we had about the product, right? So we knew that when we were building this product out, that like having a flat channel structure where everybody could just keep posting back and forth like they do in Slack makes it very, very hard for people to kind of collaborate together, right? So we kind of, when we launched Teams, we kind of went into Teams with a threaded model right at the forefront, right? So one of the challenges this caused us was the fact that when we started analyzing data, we'd see a lot of users kind of come into the product, not understand this threading model, right? And then just churn and leave out the product. And we started seeing in our user-facing forums and on things like Twitter, where people would kind of complain more and more about our threaded model, come up with feature requests saying, hey, give me a channel which looks exactly like Slack. Why are you doing this? Why couldn't you copy Slack the right way, right? And so this was like a very, very hard kind of decision for us, because we were actually facing the brunt of it in our product metrics. We would see people come in, like, be unsuccessful with Teams and then basically leave. So the way we thought about this was we kind of dug into the data a little bit more, right? So we looked at the fact that who are these people who are actually churning. Turns out, after a couple of user studies and analysis, we found out that hey, these were people who actually used Slack before, so they had a very strong kind of opinion about how this collaboration product should really be. Versus when we were actually looking at people who were successful with the Teams product with threading built in, these were net new users, right? These were people who had never experienced the power of collaboration, the power of chat as a way of getting work done. So we kind of realized that our hypothesis around threading being important is still valid. It's just that there was a habit that a couple of users had built around how they use these types of products that was messing with the way we were doing it. And these were also in the early adopter majority. So like with that type of conviction, we were able to kind of stick with some of the initial product decisions, even in the face of data. And this has really paid off because it makes it much these types of this product actually makes it much, much easier for you to bring other organizations and collaborate with them, and not just the engineering org, which is typically what you end up seeing with Slack. I know I'm running a little short in time, so I'm gonna skip a bunch of things, right? So I'm gonna talk about the whole Skype for Business migration. So one was organic adoption. So we kind of built the product, we kind of did the usual data analysis and built the product in the right way so to optimize for virality. Right? The other really big lever that we had was kind of understanding how we interplayed with Skype, right? So one of the biggest pieces of feedback that we got really, really early on into our journey was the fact that there were too many tools within the Microsoft ecosystem, right? So we had Skype for Business, then you had this tool called Yammer, which is like Facebook but for companies, and then you had Teams. customers were very confused in terms of which tool they had to use for what purpose, right? And we tried kind of creating this narrative around inner loop and outer loop where, for your CEO to communicate with you, you use tools like, Yammer, whereas for your project teams, you use tools like Teams, right? But what really kind of happened, the reason that argument or that narrative didn't really resonate with people was the fact that, hey, like we spent a lot, like IT teams had spent the last couple of 5 to 10 years kind of investing in ensuring that Skype for Business and Skype was successful in companies, right? So they spent a lot of time, buying hardware, buying network routers, all of those things to make meetings smooth, all of the things to make, chat smooth across, different, across mobile, across VPN, no VPN scenarios, and so on and so forth. So they were kind of very, very nervous about this new product that was coming in and not necessarily, taking advantage of any of the things that they put in place for the last couple of years, right? So when we started learning this becoming like a really big barrier to adoption in the larger enterprise space, we made a decision to kind of scrap everything else and focus on what we call the Skype for Business to Teams upgrade journey, right? And this is like one of those things where it's a very, very complex thing to go and build about, because Skype for Business had been a product right now for about 2 decades, right? And any product that has been in the market for that long has so much innate complexity, right? So the number of features that were built in, the number of bug fixes that went in, all of the different configurations that you could do with the product was just insane, right? So to be able to kind of go from like saying, hey, your Teams product will work with all of the things that you've done with Skype for Business is a very, very bold bet and required the entire team to kind of rally behind that initiative, right? And in order to kind of shore up our confidence amongst our buyers, one of the things that we did, again, this is the first for Microsoft, was to publish a roadmap, right, of the next 12 months of our journey in terms of integrating the 2 products, right? And this is something that Microsoft has never done before. Microsoft typically tends to not, release dates about when things will happen. And most SaaS companies don't either, because it's just such an unpredictable business to be in, right? So, but to be able to kind of, the fact that we were publishing a roadmap out there for IT teams to kind of plan against, like shored up their confidence and made the entire adoption conversation significantly easier, right? And one of the things that we also ended up doing was we made this really hard decision to not sell any new Skype for Business licenses as well. This is a product that is making, millions of revenue every single quarter, right? Being able to take a bet at the company level that, hey, Teams is really the future and this is where it needs to be is a significant kind of call. And we were able, like, and the combination of, earning IT teams confidence and not selling this product is kind of really what forced a lot of these large enterprises to become more current and start upgrading to Teams. And of course, there are different ways in which you do that. And the way Microsoft chose to do it was to incentivize the different field functions that we ended up having to focus more on upgrades more than selling Skype, right? And just to give you a sense of like how complex it was, the right-hand side is a picture that I ended up drawing about to explain my subsection of the Teams product and how it works with Skype. Like the number of different configuration options and all of the different arrows going in multiple different ways was just insane. Just in terms of like complexity for a user, for any product to kind of support, right? So let me also kind of quickly talk about how, like, once we kind of like made it very, very clear that, hey, we were going to move off of Skype and Teams is really the new platform for Microsoft and communication, right? We were really able to kind of turn on the enterprise growth machine, right? We realized that, hey, like this is a new category, right? So nobody had really used group collaboration before. So we needed to kind of focus on a new approach to sales. We just can't go and say, hey, this is a better product. It kind of comes with the bundles, you just go use it. So we had to kind of really define how the product is sold, how IT teams should kind of consider, including Teams into their suite of tools to make their team successful, right? So the way we did that was invest in our own customer success orgs, where within the Teams group, I think we were the only group that had its own dedicated marketing and dedicated customer success teams to really go educate the customer on how to be successful with Teams, build the right set of content, right, and also kind of really empower the field and the salespeople with all of the right data in terms of how they should think about the ROI of deploying a tool like Teams. What does it really mean to kind of work in group chats and channels? Nobody really understood that, so we had to kind of create a whole new narrative around it, right? The second big thing that we ended up doing was building tools for these champions. Apart from the product things that we talked about earlier, we had a team that was kind of enabling champions within the org with things like posters that they could post across their office to drive adoption, right? So we had amazing posters saying, hey, if you want this particular file, like go to this channel within Teams to go find it, right? We were able to kind of create a very scenario-specific adoption playbooks that you and I could use as a champion to get our teams kind of invested on the platform, right? And the third and most important thing, which doesn't get as much mind share, is the fact that we were able to use platforms and the apps that we're building on top of the Teams platform as a strategic advantage. First was, of course, all of the first-party Microsoft apps, right? Word, Excel, PowerPoint, OneDrive, SharePoint, all of these apps were kind of built into the Teams collaboration experience. It made it so much more usable to use than if you were to use a browser or any of those desktop apps to actually get your work done. But we were also able to use line of business apps. So things like Accenture, for example, built out a time tracking tool that was only available within Teams. So we were able to kind of incentivize users to get onto the Teams platform, even if they didn't have a significant density of collaborators, by making it useful even in single player mode, right? So we were able to kind of build these line of business applications, things like timesheets, things like being able to like view your shifts and your schedules and stuff like that to drive more adoption. One of the things that the company that I work at right now, MoveWorks, right, is also one of those platform success stories where we automate IT use cases. So it made a lot of sense for Microsoft to kind of show off MoveWorks as like a competitive advantage for Teams compared to Slack. And we started realizing that there was a lot more traction in communicating the value of Teams through the platform angle. And this is something that we've seen work very, very well for us, right? If you go back to the 2x2 that we saw earlier, right? So we talked about how Teams is kind of tapping into the existing core user base. The next set of growth areas for Teams is really going to come from expanding the existing user base of Microsoft services, right? So one of the things that we kind of noticed very, very early on, especially amongst WhatsApp users, is a lot of these people, right, were mobile first and chat first, right? So they never really had access to a PC at work. They were using their phone for everything, and most of the work that they were trying to do was done in chat. So people would take images of their shift schedules, for example, and send it via chat. Like a retail worker would stock up a shelf, take a picture and post in a group to let his boss know that, hey, the task is done. So we realized that, hey, there was an opportunity here to go after this really big market called desk-first workers. There are about 2.7 billion people are kind of in this bucket where they typically are working, in jobs like restaurants, retail, then, manufacturing, where the only access to a computer they have is most likely their mobile PC and or their mobile phone, right? And we realized that, hey, we can bundle the communication part, which Teams does really well, like being able to like communicate with your coworkers via chat on your phone, along with vertical specific workflows, things like scheduling your time on your shifts or your time off like your leaves of absences, right? And other workflows like for example, being able to assign a task to the people that you work with, right? These were things that we realized that, hey, like we could use the beachhead that Teams had built in the communication workflow to go after these markets as well. So we started deploying variants of Teams for retail and healthcare and other types of industries, right? to go after this. So in the next slide, you'll actually see like an example of what we built for teams in the retail industry, right? So it looks exactly like Teams. It has chat and calls, but then we also built this ability for people to look at, to view their shifts in a calendar format. And then in addition to this, they were able to also, like as a worker, I could go, bid on shifts from other people as well. So like I can say, hey, I'm like, I want some extra money, so I can look at all of the shifts that haven't been filled yet and then, place a bid on those. Or I could say, hey, like I'm sick, I want to swap my shift. So we were able to kind of bring those types of, vertical experiences into Teams and drive adoption amongst these people who have never really used Microsoft services before. And the real interesting piece here is it's a natural extension of the team strategy, because we already have people in corporate or in headquarters using Teams for their collaboration, right? Now, by expanding Teams to all of the people that they were using WhatsApp to communicate with, it becomes like a seamless kind of natural flow for everybody within the company, whether you're a deskless worker or like a corporate knowledge worker, to use Teams. So it just became like a natural land and expand strategy. And this is really where you'll see more and more of Teams in the future, and you'll see more and more value being driven to Microsoft and Microsoft revenues from the Teams bundle, right? So last couple of thoughts that I'll leave with before we kind of switch over to Q&A was, like, there are a couple of things that worked really well for us, right? The first fact was, in addition to all of the things that we built, was the fact that network effects were localized, right? So every time an org came on board to Slack, right, the maximum reach or the maximum number of users they could capture was the number of people in that org, right? It was localized. There was no way in which, just because I'm using Slack at this company, there was an incentive created in any other company to use Slack. More recently, they started, building out these features like shared channels, which let you kind of build those network effects across different orgs. But this is something that was never at play. This really helped us kind of go in and drive that adoption the way we did. The second that we also noticed was IT's influence is significant, right? Especially IT nowadays cares a lot about the end user experience. And they're very, very invested in making sure their employees are very, very successful with any software that they use. Especially in new categories, they want to be very focused on understanding how this is driving value to their customers. So we were able to kind of use the existing relationship that we had with IT to go after that. The third thing was most of Slack's adoption was kind of was contained in the developer community because of their rich platform and the way in which things got done through chat and IRC earlier, right? So developers were like a really strong base that were using Slack, but then the rest of the company, like finance and marketing and all of these other functions, were typically not using this. They were still using the old paradigm. They weren't able to expand quickly enough to envelop the entire org, resulting in this. And the fourth thing is something we call bookending, where Slack has a really good bottoms-up strategy, but then they weren't able to kind of match that with a really strong top-down strategy as well. So it's called a bookend because you are basically covering the book from both sides, right? So they weren't able to bookend us because they took a really long time to actually ramp up an enterprise sales force. This goes back to the institutional intuition piece that I talk about, right? So like Slack was founded by Stewart, who spent a lot of his time in the consumer ecosystem, and that's typically the mental model and the intuition that he brings to products is on that front. So it took them a much longer time than necessary to actually go build out an enterprise sales force and kind of change the narrative in terms of how they could influence IT. So with that, and one last thought about how the next set of battles are, I think Teams and Zoom is now going to be like the interesting kind of battle to kind of watch. And I actually think that this is going to be very, very different in terms of outcomes and the way it plays out because of a couple of reasons, right? The first is the fact that, hey, Zoom was significantly ahead of quality, right? Compared to Skype for Business, which is still the dominant kind of meetings platform. It's not Teams still yet. So it's a much easier conversation for Zoom to kind of have, right? And secondly, IT has been purchasing video conferencing software for a very, very long time. So it's very easy for them to kind of go in and say, hey, these were the metrics that you cared about, right? And here's how we are better. So it's a no-brainer for people to kind of go after things like Zoom versus Skype for Business or Teams. And as a result, like Zoom, because of the fact that it was founded by Eric, who kind of came from the WebEx side of things, right? He kind of really understood the enterprise sales motion as well, and they were able to build a really strong go-to-market very, very early. And all of these things has really resulted in Zoom being the best of both worlds, where you see Zoom kind of the go-to for like webinars like this, or like your Hangouts during lockdown and Corona times, to every single company also using it. So it's going to be an interesting battle to see how Teams is going to go penetrate that. I have my thoughts in terms of how they're going to go about doing it, but yeah, this will be like one of those things to watch. So yeah, so with that, like I'm going to pause here. I know this was a lot of things thrown at you. So if you have any questions, comments, like I'm very happy to kind of engage in the discussion now.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rahul. I think this is a great refresher because, B2B enterprise growth isn't, as sexy, but I think the way Teams has really grown is interesting to know the internal point of view on, how things really happen. You can hear me well, right?
Yes.
Yeah, awesome. So I'll just pick up a question that we have on Slido. The first one that I see is not the most voted, but what is the strategy behind Microsoft? It's not really a Teams question, but Microsoft allowing Zooms to have Outlook integration. You're essentially giving your user base Zooms, right? When you yourself have Skype, you have Yammer, you have Microsoft Teams. So what is the advantage of letting them come in your space?
A couple of things. I think one is most Microsoft products have an open platform, so we don't really restrict anybody from building on top of the existing platform. So the Zoom plugin that you see and the Teams plugin that you see were actually built by the Zoom product group and the Teams product group within Outlook. Right? Outlook didn't necessarily do anything. And Microsoft is also very, very careful in terms of how they restrict competition from building on top of their products. They learned the lesson the hard way when Netscape sued Microsoft, and it kind of became like an existential crisis for the company. Right? If you remember the whole antitrust case that the U.S. government brought against Microsoft. So ever since then, things are people are very careful in terms of what they do. One fun story here was we were trying to kind of figure out how we could get Outlook to not classify Teams emails as spam, because that was happening. And we thought that, hey, it would be an easy conversation. You could go reach out to the Outlook team, find the spam PM, and talk to them about getting tips. That entire conversation was shut down because like this is not something that they reveal to anybody else. They're not going to reveal to internal Microsoft folks either. So
Fair
it's
point.
more an artifact of an open strategy more than being something being intentional.
Got it. Thanks for that. Another question here is from Akash. He asked the difference between Yammer and Teams. Like you have multiple apps doing something similar, and what is Microsoft's strategy behind Yammer? As far as I know, I think they are removing Yammer from the main thing, right? They are stopping support for that, right? But what is the strategy behind multiple chat apps?
Yammer is still supported. Yammer is still out there. I think the last I remember about Yammer was they were trying to kind of figure out how to integrate the two products better. This is a consistent point of confusion that most customers have, right? When do I use Yammer? When do I use Teams? And increasingly, Teams is also kind of focusing on large company use cases as well, doing things like live events, doing things like announcements from the CEO. So the overlap has become really, really strong between the Teams product and the Yammer product. I can tell you what the Teams product groups thinks, because that's kind of the point of view that I'm exposed to. I think
you could add in Skype there as well, because I think Skype is also predominantly used before Zoom came in. So say you have these three. I don't know if there's a fourth, but say these three ones. When does one use the other, and what is the current strategy for Microsoft?
Yeah, so I think with Skype, it's easy. I think Skype was the fact that it is a consumer product, so anybody can use it for free. So, and the way Skype also monetizes is through calling plans and credit. right? You pay
Yeah.
for it
Yep.
directly. They also have other types of interesting things like Skype for Professionals, where you could
Exactly.
set up like a paywall, like I know a lot of people do like guitar lessons virtually using Skype for Professionals, right?
Mm-hmm.
But with Teams and Yammer, the distinction is less clear. There is an official narrative around the fact that like you use Teams for like your core project team, your the set of 20 people that you collaborate with on a day-to-day basis,
Mm-hmm.
and Yammer for large groups for the entire company. That's how you connect with HR or finance or like CEO messages and town halls and those aspects, right?
Right.
And over time, you'll see more and more of these products kind of converge, and Teams kind of becoming like the one place
Yeah.
where everything, where all things chat and collaboration happens.
Got it. Got it. Got it. Fair enough. Fair enough. The question that's right on top with max upvotes right now is, I know you've been in an IC role, but what frameworks do you generally tend to use to define long-term product strategy? So anything that you've probably picked up at Microsoft, or anything that you know from personal use cases?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. The first, there are a couple of very interesting things that the teams are used to do, right? We were extremely data driven, both
Mm-hmm.
on the enterprise side as well as on the product consumer side as well. So
Mm-hmm.
let me give you an example of that, right? So for our enterprise side of things, we would have our customer success managers kind of maintain a really highly vetted list of all of the different things that our customers were asking for, and
Mm-hmm.
categorize them based on opportunity, potential, why this is important, what teams it belongs to, and so on and so forth, right? So at any
Right.
given point in time, as a product manager, like you had access to a very highly vetted list of here's what our biggest customers think, here's what our smallest customers think, and it was all kind of stack ranked based on priority, right?
Yeah.
And this is like a significant driver of our input
Mm-hmm.
into our planning cycles. We would do planning once every quarter, so we would do an QQQ plan. Basically, the
Right.
next 3 months are extremely clear, and
Mm-hmm.
then the next 3 quarters are kind of hazy out. So this would be one artifact that would kind of drive a lot of the conversations in the planning cycle. The
Mm-hmm.
second is we would always consistently try to launch things that meaningfully advance the user experience, right? So apart from like meeting enterprise adoption, like
Yeah.
user experience is like another really big bucket that we would focus on. So for
Mm-hmm.
that, like I think our every single product manager was supposed to kind of back up any new features they wanted to build with a strong hypothesis and some data, not unlike any consumer product that you have out there. Because when you're
Got it.
building for millions of people, right, at the
Yeah.
end of the day, you
Mm-hmm.
are building a consumer product because
Mm-hmm.
like you're not building for any two specific companies. The other interesting thing was we would also kind of, once we published the public roadmap, that kind of
Yeah.
became the roadmap for the next year internally as well. So it was a very, like during that year, like basically that was the only thing that got done, like migrating from Skype to Teams.
Fair point. That's interesting. Um, this question's unknown, but it's pretty much right on top. How fair is it to compare teams? I think you've covered most of it already, but any more things that you'd like to add? So how fair is it to compare teams to Slack, given that you already had so many paying subscribers and your position was really strong in terms of your customers? So is it really an apples to apple, or is it an apples to orange comparison?
I think it's an apples to apples comparison because every single Teams customer is a paid customer by default, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like they are paying for the bundle at the end of the day. They are paying for Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and Teams together. So I
Right.
don't necessarily believe in the narrative that hey, like just because it comes as part of the bundle, it's free. It's really not.
Is there a difference? Like, for example, you need only say like Word, Excel, and something. The price is X, but if you want to add Teams, it's Y. Teams doesn't come in free with the rest, is it?
So there is a SKU where you can just buy Word, Excel, and PowerPoint,
Yeah,
just those desktop apps. And it's basically meant for students and people like you and I who are like kind
personal
of
use.
working on things on a
Yeah.
personal basis.
Mm-hmm.
But the most common SKU that our customers buy is something called Enterprise One or E1. It
Mm-hmm.
goes all the way to E5, and I think now there's an E7 SKU as well, just to give
Okay.
you a sense of
Those
like
are bigger bundles,
how much.
right? E1 to
Yeah, these
E7
are
would.
exactly. E5,
Okay.
E5 is like the biggest, most expensive bundle that we have. So
Okay.
E1 is the base bundle where Teams and Exchange, which is basically our email services, kind of included as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and the reason why I also don't believe
Yeah.
in that narrative is because we've proven very strongly that
Mm-hmm.
like Teams being part of the bundle is good for the bundle, right?
Right.
It's not like we're kind of mooching off of the
Piggybacking.
bundle and
Yeah.
then piggybacking off of it without
Mm-hmm.
driving more value. Actually,
Got it.
Teams being part of the bundle makes it much more likely that a customer is going to pick Microsoft over anything else. And we've started seeing that amongst large companies too.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Got it. I think couple of other Teams questions, but I think you covered most of it. Now just opening it up to more product management and a little beyond Teams value questions.
Mhm.
So I think again anon, but this is more what would Rahul choose? Say you had data, UX design, and business acumen. If you could pick only one skill for a PM, which one would it be? I think the context is someone is looking to switch and is trying to go T-shaped. Just trying to understand your perspective. I think it's more of a personal choice,
UX
but what's
design,
yours?
business, and what was the third one?
Data, UX/design, and business acumen.
It depends on the company that you want to build your career out at, right?
Yep.
It comes down to that. If you work at, let's say, an Apple, like you would probably want to be a PM that has amazing design chops, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just because that's kind of how the company is built around and organized around design and that. So typically, if you're on a consumer company, then UX and design and data probably a much better skill for you to build around. If you're
Mm-hmm.
in an enterprise kind of company, I think having a business kind of acumen probably is the better skill that you need to build, right? And you can do the way I think about this is like you can build multiple T's over the duration of your career, and you
Mm-hmm.
do that by choosing the right set of product teams to work on, or the right set of products to build.
Fair point. Fair point. Another one is more specific to Microsoft in general. So, how does Microsoft allow? How does the role of a product manager differ in the US versus in India? I think if you have some context specific to Microsoft, and how do they allocate product development to different regions? Does product dev happen in India, in the US? How does that work?
I'll take the second one because that's easy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the answer is it kind of really comes down to the VP of the group and them deciding how they want to structure their teams.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things about the Teams Group is based in Bangalore as well. So and they built that
Product
team
as
out
well.
about a year after founding.
Okay. Product as well. The product team.
Product, yeah. So
Okay.
it's a product group that sits out of Bangalore, I think in of ORR, and this is something, and they're a very core part of how we build products as well, right? So like it's
Interesting.
clean areas of ownership and delineation. So it kind of totally comes down to the VP strategy. There's no one size fits all kind of rule there.
Mm-hmm. Fair point. I'm seeing a lot more Teams questions coming now, so I think maybe people are posting questions there. So jumping right back in, um, I think one of them is interesting that says, for who is your product really positioned for? Is this business customers? Is it end customers? Because right now Microsoft is offering, I think, even personal teams. I think there is a CTA someone has found, which leads them back to Skype, for example. So what is the product really positioned for?
Yeah, no, I would kind of think about Teams as built for really maybe 3 to 4 types of customers over time, right? So when we
Mm-hmm.
started, we were very focused on making work teams very successful, right? So that
Mm-hmm.
was really the core market that we launched with, and that still continues to be the biggest focus, right? Over time, we started adding versions of the product that work well for different subsets, right? So by customizing different aspects. So Teams for Education was like the next big piece. And
Mm-hmm.
the third thing that we started adding was Teams for Retail and Teams for Healthcare. And more recently, they announced Teams for Personal subscriptions as well. So this is basically, the whole idea is everybody needs to communicate, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we use messaging as the biggest way of communicating today. So it just
Mm-hmm.
is a matter of flavorizing messaging to capture more market share across different industries and
Mm-hmm.
help more and more people kind of get stuff done. So Teams for Personal, I think typically comes from the idea that A lot of people were already using Slack and Teams for, to manage their small nonprofits, to manage their small groups of friends, to manage their, school parents group, for example. So we thought that, hey, like this is one of those things where if you were to kind of go after and meet those users' needs specifically, if you were to build a product for them, what would that look like? Turns out it looks kind of like Teams with some things taken out and some things added in. So that's why there's a Teams for personal version that's coming out as well. I think they just announced it. It's not something that you can try out today, probably at the end of the summer, but yeah.
Got it. I think now moving on, I think we saw a really smooth and really nice curve, a hockey stick curve for Teams, but I'm pretty sure there would have been a lot of challenges as well. So a couple of them that, how did you deal with initial set of customers? Were they like, super impressed by the product, they were ready to pay right away? Or did you have challenges, selling the product to your customers? If not for that, were there other challenges? I'm pretty sure in large organization, like you mentioned, one of the biggest victories for Microsoft was shipping the product from 0 to beta in under 18 months. So say 2 challenges that we have here, but you might want to add in how you solve these and the other ones that you faced.
Yeah, that was the one slide that I ended up skipping. I called it the messy middle because at the end of the day, like a graph looks very smooth when you zoom it out enough with enough granularity, everything looks awesome, right? I'll give you 2 specific stories. One was around performance, right? So we built this app in such a short period of time that for the app to open, it would take forever, right? So like if somebody survives our loading screen, then they would be like the most successful user in the world, because it would just take them forever to kind of, get into Teams and start using that with our product, right? So, and we realized that, hey, like we'd spent the last 24 months building, adding code, building, bloat to the product with and we accumulated so much technical debt that there was something had to give. So we spent about 2.5 months basically in a feature lockdown where we built no new features, where every single engineer in the entire org, to their dismay, was working on fixing bugs and working on building the right set of tooling so that once we got out of that lockdown, we were able to ship faster and ship a high quality product, right? So we were able to, we had to make very hard calls like that consistently from time to time. And this feature lockdown thing, unfortunately, just given how quickly the Teams product continued to grow, it's still something that happens today. They call it milestone quality, where they basically pause all new feature development and then kind of focus on quality packs and getting that getting your bug load kind of down to 0 before you kind of start building out new features. The core driving factor behind Teams is always, how do we deliver value to our users in the shortest period of time? And sometimes it means that you accrue technical debt and then you figure out the right time to actually go pay that off, right? The second big challenge that we ended up seeing was organizational design, right? So like as you add more and more engineers, I think like Sidhu Ponappa talks about this phenomenally, right? As you add an engineer actually slowing things down, you're not speeding things up. And we felt that very, very strongly. Especially we added teams in Prague and we added teams in Bangalore. And things, we weren't necessarily shipping anything faster. We were always, a bug that was checked in by a team in Fubar location would start affecting you, and you had no idea how that would happen, right? So being able to like really restructure the orgs in such a way that you were able to like focus on your mission, focus on reducing dependencies, focus on going after a specific series of problems is something that we had to learn the hard way. And it was consistently, we had to keep reorging and changing orgs all the time to go make that happen. So that was another really big challenge that we had to work through. And nobody had written a playbook for this. So.
Right. Yeah. What was the numbers while you moved on from the team section, like that team? What were some numbers? Like how did your org really, like, how did the team structure really look like?
Yeah, so we had feature-based squads for the part. So like I was the PM driving messaging and presence. So presence is that green little dot that tells you if a person's online or not, and then messaging is obviously messaging, right? So chat and channels and all of that. So we had squads basically that was kind of focused on that. We had a squad that was focused on on building team structures, because like we had to kind of integrate with the rest of the Microsoft ecosystem. We had a developer ecosystem squad and stuff like that. So we were
So
primarily focused
a
on.
squad would be dev, design, and a product guy, right? All three of them would be one squad, right?
Yes, that's right. So it would be dev, design, and product.
Mm-hmm.
And we also had we had centralized teams for growth. We had centralized teams for analytics, as
Mm-hmm.
well as things like internal tooling, for example, was another centralized team.
And
One of the things where I think we could have structured this a little differently was we had mobile teams that were different. So we
okay,
had a centralized mobile team. So when I was a product manager for messaging, like I would work with my devs to go build a feature out. But then I would also have to go work with the mobile
mobile
PM
team.
in
Mm,
ensuring that they were, building that out.
that
And
makes
this,
sense.
this actually meant that mobile teams were like always consistently catching up, because you had like 80% of the org building new things, and then you had
Right,
20% of the org building stuff on mobile. And I've learned
correct.
that this is actually not a very uncommon pattern amongst many companies.
Enterprise,
But
yeah.
yeah. But one of the advantages of that is Teams mobile apps like typically tend to ship features maybe a month after the desktop app does, and
Uh-huh.
which means every single edge case has been figured out by that point. So they actually are significantly better experiences than the Teams desktop apps. So if you ever
Yeah,
want to get the best in class Teams experience, use mobile first.
got it, got it, got it. You guys are probably doing the beta testing for them. So
Pretty much, exactly.
yeah,
We figure out all of the bugs, we figure out all of the issues, and then when it gets built, it's built in amazing quality.
nah. What about marketing and sales? How much of your function really overlaps with them? How much of your time really, sits with them on, figuring out whether your customers are really buying these products, or is that not something that your time goes into?
So a couple of things. So the marketing and sales org typically tends to be aligned more closely with the bundle, because that's how the customer buys it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's one centralized marketing team, one centralized sales team for Microsoft 365 or Office 365 as a whole,
Mm-hmm.
and they're incentivized. There's specific roles within within those orgs as well, called fast track deployment specialists, and we have all of these various technical sales solution specialists and all of these different Microsoft terms for
Mm-hmm.
people, right, who are selling. They're incentivized on how many users they bring onto the Teams platform, right, by
Fair enough.
selling it to different accounts. But the one thing that the Teams org did differently beyond the centralized marketing was
Mm-hmm.
we had our own customer success org, right? Because Teams was such a new use case, we had to focus on educating the customer in terms of how they were supposed to deploy Teams, how they were supposed to, get their first set of users on board, how they could, leverage all of the different adoption packets that we put together to actually drive more and more users onto the platform. So we had our own customer success org that was kind of focused on deploying customers within Teams and making sure that they were actually leveraging it the right way. So we had a
Got it.
centralized team that was
Mm-hmm.
selling the bundle, but we also had
Mm-hmm.
a very focused team. And this was something that's very new to Microsoft, just in terms of how they operate. And now this has become like a more common pattern where most of the new cutting edge pioneering orgs typically start to have their own business acceleration and customer success teams, because they're really trying to figure out the playbooks. And
Mm-hmm.
then once it gets into a stage where it is systemizable, where it is repeatable, then you can go hand it out to the broader sales team and have them execute on it.
Thank you. Yeah, that is great. We have about 8 minutes left in this session, so I think just about two questions that we can cover. One of them is around numbers. So where does Microsoft Teams really go from here? They're already at 75 mil. Slack is around at 12 mil. So do you have any numbers, any market research? I'm pretty sure you know some market research about this. So what's next? Where is the cap? What is Microsoft Teams going to do next?
Yeah, the biggest thing is one obvious milestone is ensuring that all of the different Office 365 subscribers that we do have are using Teams. It's about that. I think that's about 200 something million. They keep announcing a new number every so often. I just don't know what the latest one is.
Latest one.
So like that's a meaningful milestone just in terms of driving adoption within that particular base. And that's a very complex milestone to achieve, because you have governments using us in like their own data centers. You have all these regulated industries. So there's a lot of product that needs to be built to go cater to that. The biggest opportunity though is going after the deskless worker market that we talked about, right?
Yep.
Ensuring that, when sales associates at at Nordstrom's or like Starbucks are communicating, they're using Teams to kind of communicate internally
Mm-hmm.
for their work, right? Versus WhatsApp or versus Messenger or versus iMessage. And that's
Mm-hmm.
the really big opportunity. And that's something where right now estimates, Gartner believes that that's a market that's like about 2.7 to 3 billion odd people, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that's going to be a very interesting, and about a billion of those are in in more of an organized sector where you can reach them through existing channels. So like I think that's going to be the really big next 5 to 10 year kind of horizon. Like that's where Microsoft as a whole is kind of focused, ensuring that they're moving away from expanding from the knowledge worker market, like people who sit in front of a PC, to
Mm-hmm.
to ensuring that their services are consumed every single place. Like Azure is
Okay.
one way they're doing that, and the second one is by building things into Teams and other new services potentially.
Got it. Got it. Got it. Yeah, I think thanks so much for that one fun question to leave you with, and maybe then closing remarks, anything that you'd like to plug. But someone here is again anonymous, but I mean it's more fun because someone asked if you were to repeat the team's success story, 0 to 75 million, for different product in a startup with limited resources, how would you do it?
I think I'll answer that question in a year and a half's time. That's the
Yeah.
whole idea with where I am right now.
Yeah.
With works, I'm trying to figure out how we can leverage all the different growth channels we have to drive the same exact thing. So yeah, so I'll know year and a half. I think there are a couple of things that I would definitely want to try. One of them is ensure that you have a really strong enterprise sales strategy, especially in we're building AI automation for IT service desks. Nobody knows what that's like, right?
Mm-hmm.
So ensuring that when your salesperson goes and talks to the right set of people to buy the product, they know what to compare you against, right? They know
Yep.
how to evaluate the product. I think that's one really big lesson that I took away from Teams versus Slack, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is the fact that Teams was able to kind of demonstrate that, hey, like we are much better along these dimensions, which is why you should use security and privacy and trust. So that's one really big playbook that I will definitely take into my current gig.
Got it. Got it. I think thanks so much, Rahul, for those insights. I think a lot of points where now tomorrow, if I have to talk to someone about Teams, I know at least something that I can talk to them about. And hopefully we'll see you in like a year and a half again and learn from, a more works dimension there and, your story there. So
Yeah,
I think that's about it from our side. Any closing remarks, anything that you'd like to plug anywhere folks here could connect with you outside of this channel?
yeah, absolutely. So first of all, thanks so much for having me. I think it's a lot has kind of happened in the 3.5 years that I spent on Teams. So it's kind of nice
Yeah.
to just putting this deck together, kind of relive some of those memories. It was definitely a fun ride. So it's nice to kind of be able to share that story. So to connect with me, like I'm pretty active on Twitter, and that's how Suhas and I met as well.
Yeah.
So like I'm I love meeting people off of Twitter. So like feel free to DM me or tweet at me, or you can always connect on LinkedIn too. So like I love talking to new people, love talking about products. So this is going to be awesome.
Awesome, awesome. Thanks so much, Rahul. And just before we close the session, just want to give everyone here a shout out. This was our third fundraiser in the series, and we'll be shooting out an email to all of y'all with the contribution that all of you guys have made possible. So thanks once again from all of us at the Product Folks to all you guys for the contribution, and hope you guys stay safe. We will be sharing the recording with the guys who've signed up. So feel free. I mean, do check that out in your emails as well. And if you like the session, feel free to give Rahul a shout out, give us a shout out, and let us know what you'd like to see next so we can bring it to you hopefully next week. See you around. Thanks, Rahul. Thanks again. And
Thanks so
thanks
much.
again
Thanks
for joining us.
everybody.
See you.